There's a voice that shows up right before freedom becomes available. It doesn't say no. It says, not yet. You're not ready yet. You haven't done enough work yet. You haven't integrated it yet. You haven't processed it fully yet. There's a version of you that needs to exist first. More healed, more regulated, more aware, more evolved, before the threshold becomes something you're actually allowed to stand on. We talked about this a couple episodes ago and called it future focus. One of the ego's two moves at the threshold. This episode is about what that voice is actually doing. It's not denying you freedom. It's deferring the verdict, which means it never has to defend the courtroom. It just has to keep scheduling it for later. Here's what makes future judgment the ego's most sophisticated courtroom. Every other courtroom this series has examined had to defend itself. The apology transaction had to justify the verdict. The jailer had to maintain the sentence. The right fighter had to win the argument. All of them required active maintenance, a case being made, evidence being gathered, a verdict being upheld. Future judgment doesn't have to do any of that. It just has to stay scheduled. The verdict is never delivered, which means it never has to survive examination. It's always almost ready. Always one more stage away. Always waiting on a condition that hasn't been met yet. And conveniently, the condition is something that can never be fully verified as met. How do you know you've processed enough? How do you know you're regulated enough? How do you know you've integrated it fully? You don't. And that's the entire design. A courtroom with no verdict can never be proven wrong. It just stays open indefinitely, collecting more evidence, requiring more work, always one stage closer to a finish line that was never meant to be reached. Here's where this shows up most convincingly right now. Neuroscience. Regulate your nervous system. Widen your window of tolerance. Heal your attachment style. Process the trauma stored in the body. All of it backed by research, brain imaging, credentialed expertise. All of it pointing toward the same structure. You are not ready yet. And the readiness is always one stage further down the road than where you currently are. Here's the honest problem with using the brain to validate what the brain needs. The brain is the instrument doing the studying, and the brain is also the subject being studied. Relying on tools and methods created by the very equipment in question to validate the effectiveness of that same equipment is suspect at best. The study of the thing by the thing. This is not an argument against neuroscience as a field. The research is real. The findings are real. What's worth examining is the authority the findings are given. The assumption that the instrument measuring itself can deliver a final, objective verdict on what it needs before it's permitted to be free. It can't. Not because the research is bad, because the position is structurally impossible. The same way judgment was structurally impossible. Not because perception is malicious, but because perception is partial. And the thing doing the perceiving cannot step outside itself to verify its own findings. Here's what makes this more than a clever observation about research methodology. The senses this entire system relies on were never built to detect danger. They were built to prove it. Try naming one thing experienced through the senses that does not eventually die. Every object of perception in the physical world is on its way to ending, which means the senses don't show you proof of life. They show you proof of death, consistently, reliably, without exception. And the brain, built from the same material it's trying to study, processes that data and produces exactly what you'd expect from an instrument fed a constant stream of evidence for danger. Vigilance. Alarm. The conviction that something needs to be regulated before it's safe to stop watching. That is not a flaw to be fixed with better regulation. It's the predictable output of a system studying itself using only the evidence it was built to notice. If the instrument can't deliver a final verdict on itself, if the courtroom of future readiness never actually happens, if the senses were built to prove danger rather than detect truth, what happens to the threshold? Nothing happens to it. It was never waiting on the verdict to begin with. The threshold doesn't require the nervous system to be regulated first. It doesn't require the brain to finish studying itself. It doesn't require the nervous system to certify through its own partial instruments that it's now safe to stop being afraid. Here is the only place the threshold exists. Now. Not because the research is wrong about the brain, because the brain was never qualified to be the final judge of what's required before truth is available. Nothing real was ever threatened, which means nothing real was ever waiting on a future verdict to become true. The courtroom can stay open as long as it wants. It was never qualified to rule on this anyway. The ego's last courtroom is the one it built in the future. It never has to open. It just has to stay scheduled. The instrument studying itself was never going to deliver the verdict that sets you free. Sit with this. Next time, stop passing judgment on one another.